Interpreting change with percentages. Now, the key word here is interpreting. Just keep that in mind. So let's kind of talk through what we're doing today. First, we need to talk about change. Now, I feel like when you talk about change, it's a progression, and usually it starts with absolute change. So in case you've forgotten, absolute change is the absolute value of the future value minus the initial value. And these are really just reference values, okay? So you're going to identify future and initial and take the absolute value. So we can just say, like, my salary increased $3,000. That's an absolute change. Relative change is one step further, where we would take the absolute change and divide by the initial value. In symbols, it's the absolute value of future value minus the initial value all over the initial value. So now we're talking in terms of a decimal. Now, most of us don't really talk in terms of a decimal, so we jump straight then to the percent change. Percent change is just taking the relative change and multiplying it by 100, because this turns it into a percent. And then we can talk about my salary increased 2.5% this year. I wish, right? We can talk about things in terms of a percentage change, but that's how they all go together. So again, if you want to see percent change in terms of symbols, we would take the absolute value of future value minus the initial value all over the initial value and then multiply by 100, right? So that's kind of the same piece. Okay, let's get back to my initial thing, which I talked about the word interpret. So when we are interpreting change, we want to know, what does it mean? So we don't necessarily just care that the answer is 5. What does that 5 mean? So interpret. Tell me what it means. Give me some context. Let's do a problem. As you graduate from college, you receive 2 job offers. Congratulations. The first is for $47,500 annually, and the other is for $55,000 annually. Calculate and interpret the change in salary offers using percentages. Okay, so we need to use percentages, which means percent change. But remember, there's a progression. So we do absolute change, relative change, percent change, right? It's kind of like a piece, one by one by one. So first, if we think about absolute change, we need to know our initial value and our final value, right? They're reference points. So I'm going to start by saying the first job offer I got will be my initial, $47,500. The final will be the second one for $55,000. Great. Now I can go ahead and play with values. So let's start with absolute change. The absolute value of final value minus initial value. So 55,000 minus 47,500. Well, that's the absolute value of 7,500, and the absolute value of 7,500 is indeed 7,500. So that's the absolute change. Great. Now let's move on and find the relative change. So remember, relative change is the absolute change divided by the initial value. So I know my absolute change we just found to be 7,500. And if you forgot, my initial is 47,500. So I divide that by 47,500. Now this gives us a decimal of 0.15789 ... It goes on and on and on and on and on. Well, let's go ahead and just keep that for now. But now we can move on to our percent change. So we're going to take that decimal and multiply it by 100, which essentially just moves the decimal 2 places and gives me 15.789%. If we would round to the nearest whole percent, I would look here. 7 tells me to round up, so this rounds to 16%. So my percent change is 16%. Great. Now that's the calculating piece, but what does it mean? Well, quite simply, my job offers increased 16% from the first to the second, right? Something like that. You could also say the second job offer was 16% higher than the first. These are basically the same thing. We're talking about an increase. Something was higher. That's what you're talking about. From first to the second, higher than the first. Okay? This process is the same if we're comparing two percentages, right? In this particular question, we compared static numbers, but if we were comparing changes in stock percentages, 3.5 to 4.5, we could still find the same basic idea. So make sure when you're talking about interpreting, you are writing a sentence, right? A complete sentence that talks about what does it mean. That is the point of interpretation.